Hello, everyone, and welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Today, I'm joined by Alex. Alex is one of our Discord community members from the southeast of the United States. We spoke to Alex a few months ago now, after his first experience at a large milsim, and I thought it would be a great opportunity for us to catch up. Alex and I have been talking a little bit in the last couple of weeks, and there's a couple of things we want to talk about. But before we get into it, how have you been, man? How's Airsoft treated you over the last couple of months?
It's still just been good with it. I just haven't been able to really keep up much because so far all my efforts have to been to saving up for a new house that I'm looking to buy, hopefully within a few weeks. Just been focusing on that, but I've been mainly prepping plans for what to do afterwards because now that I have more of a good view on what I plan to do with college and work. So I plan to have it where I'll try to do a typical Monday through Friday scheduling, do night classes on my other weekdays. So that way airsoft can be a regular hobby for me as opposed to something that was all about basically paid days off or having to basically plan for special circumstances. So I'm being excited that looks like it's something I'll be able to act on soon.
That's awesome. And I mean, that's a reality of growing up life. I remember people at our field, younger guys who've been playing for, maybe they're just 16, 17 years old. And they're out twice a week, every Wednesday night, every Saturday. And they're like, how come you guys don't come out very often? It's there's a lot of stuff that goes on. And like you said, looking for a house, going to college, all this plays into it. So yeah, but I'm glad to hear that you got a plan to get back into it once everything sort of stabilizes a little bit more by the sounds of it.
Yeah, it's been quite hectic the last few months.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, good luck to you on that front. I know when we were talking about doing this episode, one of the things that really stuck out to me is you were talking about how airsoft and playing airsoft and sort of the conversations we've had has really informed your views on other hobbies that you also have. And I was excited to get the chance to talk to you about that. So did you want to start off maybe by talking a little bit about what you mean when you say that? How has airsoft informed your other hobbies?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, since getting back now that it's been about a year and some change since I finally got back into it, I had been thinking a lot about this hobby because I actually got back into it when for a long time I got out because I was in a very difficult spot. But then when I got happy, I sort of rediscovered it. And then when I started playing more and more and started thinking about how this makes me feel, and I feel it really came to a head a few months ago when I finally went to Iron Horse 4. Where after I played that and all the things that the experiences it gave me, how happy I was, these memories that I'm always going to keep forever, it just really had me thinking so much about how this hobby has started informing other hobbies that I'm into, particularly because airsoft's the only real, I would say, niche hobby I've ever really had any significant time delved into. And since I usually have been in more mainstream hobbies, I feel it really informed how I view them because I inhabited about a few mainstream hobby areas on online, maybe online groups and stuff like that. And for me, I felt that all this time that I was planning on focusing on it, and then with airsoft being a hobby that I felt was more being in my focus, and seeing how I was playing, how I was interacting with other players, both in our Discord server as well as also in field, whether it was at the fields I played at or Iron Horse that I played at. It just all informed thoughts that I had now that I was really wanting to put for an episode, but wanted to sort of try to more narrow down it so that way it wasn't just some scatterbrained kind of episode, basically.
Yeah, totally. And I think one of the things we've talked about it a lot. I mean, we released an episode a little while ago, and a huge part of airsoft in particular is concerned with how you interact with other players, right? And how you interact with your community. And to give a side example of a more mainstream hobby, like a sporting, right? Maybe you're playing hockey, you're playing basketball or whatever, you interact with the team members that you have on your team. And if you play hockey, you might get in a fight with a player on the opposing team or whatever. But really, there's not a lot of time dedicated to building the community and creating that space. And, so I think it's interesting that you talk about your interactions with other players informing a lot of these things that are going on in your head, because in other sports, you just laser focused on whatever the thing is supposed to be, like scoring more scores than the other team or whatever, as opposed to what we do, which is, I would say, and I think your opinion as well, is a bit more fluid than that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, when I started getting back into airsoft, I started really re-experiencing again now that I was a more, I guess I was able to now socialize much better. I wasn't quite the introvert I was when I first
Mm-hmm.
joined. So, and noticing very quickly how social of a hobby it is when I just go into it. Like when you're in any field, most of the time there's always going to be someone, even just one person who wants to talk to you. Maybe it was a cool play you did. Maybe it's because you brought a piece of kit people think is really cool or fun. It could just be maybe even they just thought that you just acted kind of funny or whatever the case may be. People always want to talk to everyone else, especially I find like newer players. They usually want to talk to people who either are or at least are perceived to be a very experienced player, because usually they just want to get to see people from this hobby, see their experiences and all that fun stuff, though, which was a really great experience to have. But then recently it started really clicking in my mind that, like, I would say for mainstream hobbies, my main one that I felt that's where it juxtaposed it was because I was usually very much into movies. So going to theaters, watching movies where I could, trying to see other people's views on it, etc. And I found, though, that when I was engaging with airsoft again, is that with hearing these people want to be in, and especially because in our hobby, we try our hardest to make sure that we try to keep people in this hobby. That's a big concern of all of
Mm-hmm.
us, really, no matter where it is that we are at. And for me, I especially saw like it came to a head like 10 years ago, I think, because 10 years ago, Central Florida was a very vibrant airsoft scene. We had like 3 fields within half an hour of driving distance in or around Orlando. These days, there isn't really a Central Florida airsoft field. There's one that someone's trying to make, but they're having a whole bunch of legal stuff they have to do before they can put it into practice. And so, like, it, because I remembered in that field, it was quite hostile to new players. Like, even though I didn't personally experience it much, even though I was still a newbie, the thing is, I did see a lot of like the more experienced players often being like very vicious towards younger players, kids, people like that. And unfortunately, they paid the price for it because those fields don't exist anymore. They had a very bad reputation of being very toxic and unwelcoming, and they had to shut it down basically. Whereas then I thought to myself, that's like, well, when I was in movie groups or whenever I was trying to be in gatherings that talked about movies a lot, there really wasn't ever an effort to really try to even retain people that were in there. And my personal theory on it is that because in mainstream hobbies, it's implicitly understood that in a mainstream hobby, there's always going to be a whole bunch of people who are going in, frankly, way faster than anyone than the amount of people who are coming out of it for whatever reason. And so, because of that, I feel that it is something that makes it to where it becomes a more unwelcoming place because the well-being of the people who are coming in isn't really considered all that much. It's just kind of expected to where you kind of just do what everyone is saying you're supposed to do and not really much consideration for, how are they feeling? Do they feel that they're having a good time? All these various things. And I feel that even though toxicity is something all communities face to one degree or another, but I feel that this element is what especially causes a lot of extra toxicity as well as a lot of arguments, heated discussions in the film spaces that I would inhabit, because there really wasn't consideration of well-being in this whole thing or trying to really view the people you're talking to as people. And I feel it's the difference because in airsoft, you're face to face though when you're talking to people. Like, yeah, there are online spaces you can join like what we have, but when you're on the field, you're with everyone that's there and you're going to be talking to them. Or if failing that, they'll talk to you regardless of what it is.
It's really interesting that you bring that up because you're totally right. Like if you think about like a mainstream hobby, like you said movies, but as a Canadian, I'll go back to hockey. Nobody's concerned about not enough people wanting to play hockey or watch hockey or take part in hockey. Like it's not a concern. But on the flip side, it's really interesting to me too, just as a side note that, you live in Florida. And so to me, living on an island in the North Atlantic with a very small airsoft scene, the assumption is always if you go onto the mainland, which is what we call basically anywhere that's actually physically attached to North America, if you go to the mainland, you just expect that you're going to have way bigger airsoft communities. And that's based on what you're saying, is not necessarily the case. And it comes back down to this idea that we as a hobby, it's so niche. Because I mean, there are lots of other niche hobbies out there that are still not as niche, I would say, as what we do in airsoft. I think about people who play Magic the Gathering, for example. That's a pretty niche hobby, but again, there's not a concern for retaining a player base in the same way that airsoft, well, at least based on what you just said, should have. Because if you look at Newfoundland, like we had a pretty good game over the weekend. We had like 20 players out. For us, that's a pretty big deal. If we were to lose half of that player base, that would be a problem. And you've experienced that, you said over the last 10 years in Florida, you guys are going through, very much the same sort of situation where if you lose a huge amount of your player base, then fields close and you no longer have a place to play, right?
Yeah, and that's what happened. I feel that that's why the culture that a airsoft field cultivates is what determines that course. Because the problem of when you're trying to especially appeal to regulars is that regulars are they're a very dynamic bunch. And unfortunately, especially as they get older, they have all these various things that can happen in their lives that can easily make them not regulars, but rather part-timers that go there, or maybe not even coming at all. If I have a kid, 6 months from now, airsoft will have to be on the back burner of my hobbies. If I move to a different state because a job was, someone wanted to hire me for a much better paying job, I can't fly over there every weekend. So it's kind of that has to happen. God forbid, maybe I suffer some bad injury. I know one of the Stormlighters in our Discord, like you mentioned, they suffered a really bad back injury. And so they found that their pain got so bad, they couldn't even continue anymore because I think he even said that one day, after a day of play, he had to crawl to the toilet because he was so much in pain from the experience.
Yeah. Shout out to Mark, who was a bit of a trooper. But once that happened, that was sort of like, he's like, guys, I can't do that anymore. We're like, yeah, dude, you can't do that anymore. Forget it. But it's a fair point, right?
Yeah, so because of all this, and I've seen that as the years gone by now that I've come back from that sort of brief hiatus, where I have noticed a big focus on trying to really retain the talent that we have, retain the new players as they're coming in, making sure they feel welcome, making sure that we always make sure that they're having fun and all these things. And of course, it matters on fields because that's kind of one of the tricky parts of our hobby is our experience is not universal like it is in a lot of mainstream hobbies where we've all experienced the same things, even if not necessarily the same locations. So unfortunately, some of us can be going to great fields. Some of us go to fields that have people with bad attitudes. And unfortunately, it's what makes it harder to really try to discuss airsoft as a sort of what you will experience because we're all so varied and all over the world with various different people running things.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because that's really been the theme for me, at least. And I know the guys and the moderators of the Discord has been about, we have people come and go all the time, but we want to have this inclusive space because we want people to feel welcome. And it doesn't matter, what background you're coming from. It doesn't matter what country you're coming from. As long as you're, obeying server rules or whatever, not being an ass, you're taking part in the discussion, there's a place for you here. And that's very much, I think, in line with what we see at airsoft fields. You guys showing up and they're wearing, here, CAD pad for you guys, probably multicam. And you got guys showing up wearing DPM or they're wearing whatever. They're, a mishmash of kit like Glick has been posting recently, which looks really cool. Some people want to play Speedsoft, right? And so they've got a Speedsoft gun and a dye mask or whatever. And some people want to play more Milsim. Regardless, none of that really matters. Everyone, we have created this environment where everyone is willing to come play. Everyone is welcome, I should say, to come and experience airsoft however they want to do within the confines. Obviously, if you're playing Iron Horse, it's different. You're welcome to come experience airsoft in this particular format. But at most fields, most skirmishes or whatever, it's just come and have a good time, right? And really, I think you said it earlier, that emphasis on making sure that other people are having a good time. And that's not just about the field, but that's about you and how you interact with that community. And you're right that doesn't necessarily exist in a lot of other mainstream areas, right?
It doesn't. And I feel that looking by it, I think that's also what ended up making the feeling of being in these mainstream spaces and trying to talk to people in this hobby, though, that a lot of people experience all over the world. And it ends up having it where you sort of don't get seen too much as a person in so much as you're just another guy doing this among millions, basically. So because of that, I feel that it creates this sort of alienation that a lot of people have in this space, especially because in my experience with being in movies, for instance, is that having a good time when it came to movies. I don't know if hockey is the same, but at least with movies, for instance, I found that a lot of the communities I would be in pretty follow mainstream content creators who would talk about it, and I often found that joy was something that was more of an exception to what you felt in your hobby rather than something that was more just a common thing you feel like when I play at an airsoft match. And for me, it was just an environment I just wasn't feeling happy in because, like, a common thing they would always say for people to do this is always just to watch more movies. But even when I would hear them say that, there was no consideration of, but would these movies be something that you would personally feel would make you happy, that you feel would give you a good time or whatnot? Or am I just saying to watch this because it's well regarded by a lot of people, so therefore you should watch it too? And there was never that consideration of it because, like, in 2019, I felt like it was especially where I was getting the boiling point because I was watching movies constantly. Like, I'm talking all day at the theater levels, dedication kind of stuff. Like, it was quite intense even back then because I was just a college student with a part-time job. So I had all the time in the world, basically. And so I would just keep doing that. But even though I would see all these movies that I felt were really great, that I felt like really made me feel happy, though, and all these things, and I'm not talking blockbuster stuff, I'm talking like even movies that I would even find only maybe of several reviewers I would follow, maybe only one or two of them ever mentioned it. And I would just talk about these things, but no one would try to put the spotlights on these things. And instead, what people wanted to spend most of their time on was essentially dunking on the movies they didn't like. And I just wasn't liking that sort of environment because I'm like, then am I enjoying the hobby or am I just enjoying the detriment of it? Whereas coming back into airsoft, I wasn't feeling that. Everyone just wanted to have fun. And it came kind of funny because especially since people who don't play airsoft but are maybe aware of it, who make the assumption that we take our stuff really hyper seriously, I could not imagine a group who takes their hobby less seriously than we do. Like outside the whole, like, buying lots of kit or buying gears and guns and all that stuff, we mainly just focus on having fun. Like even at Iron Horse, an event that people would think where airsofters are the most hyper serious, we were joking around and having fun for most of it. We didn't really act seriously. Maybe again, when I think of serious, I at most only think of it things that if it's like, hey, like, get your butt in cover and things like that, though, like, yelling to say people like, hey, like, because we do want to win still. Obviously, that's a thing we want to do. But really, like, again, in my experience, I emphasize that it wasn't really an experience where people took that to such an extent where it was to the detriment of other people. For the most part.
Yeah. And I think you touched on a good point, which is that there is absolutely a distinction between taking yourself seriously, like in the context of your hobby, like I am really great because whatever, right? And I'm the best at this because whatever. And taking what you are doing in this particular time seriously, but joking around. Like when we play airsoft, to give you some context, like we're laughing and carrying all the time. Does that mean that when I take a piece of cover, I don't take it hard? Does it mean that when I, put fire down, clearly I'm very good with the trigger. I put down lots of rounds. I take those actions in themselves very seriously. Like I'm not just aiming whatever, like I'm trying to hit my target, right? When I'm coming out of cover, I'm watching my elbows and my knees and I'm tucked in and I'm doing all the right stuff. I'm taking those portions very seriously, but I'm joking about while I'm doing it. Right. And so I think you're totally right. Like there's this place. And I do see that sometimes in airsoft with some people, online, you see, lots of people, a huge swath of different people who take it very, very seriously. And then you got guys who take whatever they're doing. And I think Matt is a really good example on the Discord, the Storm Wizard. He does not take airsoft seriously at all in terms of his kit and stuff. But if you ask him, he's like, well, I'm still not going to do things that are detrimental to me just to joke around. I'm going to play the best that I can, but also laugh and carry on and, bring people up and, support them and make sure everyone has a good time. I think that's a really, really important distinction that you're touching on. Right. And I think that's doubly important because one of the things we talked about, in the past too, is that like, if you think about any sport or you think about, your movie watching or whatever, you said this before, like there is a way that you do that, right? If you're playing left wing in hockey, this is what left wing players do. Right? If you are a defenseman, this is what you do, right? This is how you check. This is how you back check. This is how you do all this kind of stuff, right? Whereas for airsoft, we don't have that formula, right? Like there's certain things that you should do, which is like, try not to get hit by a BB. That's usually a pretty good one. Try and hit the other guy with a BB. That's also a pretty good one. But outside of that, and wear your eye pro at all times, aside from those things, like you can really do whatever you want. And you mentioned that, right? I mean, you guys show up wearing whatever kind of camo they want. We're using whatever kind of gun they want. Are you running a ghillie suit that you build with a bolt action? Great. Are you wearing a World War II kit? Like, great. Who cares? And so as a consequence of that, we have to be a lot less rigid, I guess, in the way that we approach our hobby, and especially how we approach other players too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And especially the emphasis on like, say, how people are just happy to bring whatever. Like, I remember one of the last games I played before I had to take a break because of my real life stuff, where like he actually didn't even bring a gun at all. He just brought like a gappy stick that was inspired by Boba Fett's from The Mandalorian. And so like I just decided because I had my Mandalorian mask that my girlfriend bought for me. And so like one day I'm just like, hey dude, here, since you're already using this, you may as well just use my helmet that I had just so you can experience it. Because he was like, oh my God, they're like, I've never seen a helmet like that before. They were asking me where to buy it, and I'm like, I wish I could tell you, but the guy is in Russia, and we can't ship anything because of geopolitical politics right now.
Yeah.
So it's like I was just like, yeah. So everyone just wanted to see it though, and for this one guy, I just thought, well, here, why don't you use it? Because it seems like you have a lot of fun with it, and he had a great time being able to use it as well. Because yeah, like my mask, my Mandalorian mask, as fun as it is, it's not effective, but I find in play, we frankly don't even really care what is effective. In fact, we often don't even have so much an emphasis on winning in so much as we have more of an emphasis on, are you having fun?
Mm-hmm.
Where like even when I was even at Iron Horse though, like yeah, we still like were trying to make sure we win as much as we could, but we weren't putting that to the detriment of other players. Like the command was regularly making sure players were being shifted and where we were doing it safely, so that way we could be able to all experience the action going on instead of having it where it's like, okay, like this one squad that's in Utah platoon or whatever, like we're just going to have you in this one building all the way in the back, and we're just going to keep you there all day, because no one wants to do that, because that's not fun. Mm-hmm. But we would still make sure that everyone was still having fun for shifting it, even if it meant that, say, we could potentially make ourselves at risk of losing, but we're just mainly here to have fun. Even all the event organizers were also saying like, hey, most importantly, when you're here, have fun for this weekend, because you spent a lot of money and we don't want you guys leaving miserable.
Yeah, for sure. And like, again, it's this emphasis on, are you having fun? And you talked about it before, and we're the same way. Like we played a game a couple of weeks ago now where like the ref was like, I'm going to put the three of you attacking and everybody else defending, which, in like a structure in a village, right? And it's like, well, if just doing the math on that, like, well, there's 3 of us outside of this building and there's 8 of them inside this building. This is not going to be good. Like, it's not going to be easy. But that didn't really matter. Like, are we going to win? Probably not, but that's okay. Like, it's a challenge. It's fun. It's the guys inside are having a great time because there's 8 of them. So they feel like Superman trying to repel, 3 invaders. And we're, having fun because we're pushing hard and we're trying, different things and stuff. And there's really, that comes back to your central point from earlier, which is we need to make an effort to make sure people keep having fun and keep wanting to come back, because the second that they don't do that, and enough people don't do that, then that's when we have to look at the sport and go, oh, okay, so do we have a problem, right? Whereas that would never happen with, again, hockey as an example.
I mean, yeah, that's why for me, though, that it was sort of growing this more disillusion kind of state with it, because even though I was watching like as many movies as I possibly could, but I wasn't feeling like anyone was, or a lot, or near enough people were trying to do so. And especially because people would always talk about how like they always want new experiences for movies they're watching or all of that, which sort of triggered an interesting train of thought for me. Because when I played Iron Horse, I had a great time, but I also understood though that the news I would experience from playing Milsim were going to rapidly diminish with each subsequent operation I go to. So Iron Horse was a big example. It was the first time I drove to another state. It was the first time I went to a like mini vacation all by myself. Was the first time I played in any context outside of my home state. All kinds of stuff, like meeting Discord members. So let's say Copperhead, which I hope to go to next year. Are there new stuff I could experience there? Probably going to be several. My first time going to the West Coast, I'd be going to New Mexico, which I never thought I would ever go to. So there, it would be my first time seeing desert. There probably would be a technical there because Copperhead usually has those most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
But That's only 4, whereas the previous one I mentioned had double the new experiences. So then what happens if, say, I go to Operation Irene, maybe like, say, the same year or the following year or whatever, like, sure, first time going to Kentucky, but that's a relative new. That's not a new thing anymore. Just, okay, not in this way, but I've experienced something similar to
Yeah,
it.
totally.
Could I maybe extend maybe the newness stuff? Like, say, could I maybe throw a bunch of money so I can become a support gunner in a role? I guess that sounds like it'd be fun. Would I be for being a medic? Not really, because I feel I just don't want the sort of pressure that a medic has to have because they're your most valuable player in a squad in a milsim game. Would I want to be a squad leader? I don't know if I'd want to because I'd be in charge of other people. And there's a lot of conversating because you got to constantly communicate with your platoon leader to make sure he knows everything you're seeing so that he can direct accordingly. Could I be a platoon leader down the line, say 5-6 years? Again, it's like, maybe I could do that, but I feel that'd be a lot more pressure and too much for me. Like the platoon leader I met the op, he actually had a headset where he like each individual headset on his ear actually had 2 entirely different groups talking to him. His left earphone or earhead would have like all the squad leaders telling him everything, and his right earhead would be having command tell him everything that's going on. So he had to hear everything that the squad leaders were telling him, and then he'd have to relay that to command, and then he's just the middleman in all this. But I go,
Yeah.
would that be fun for me, or would I be doing this strictly on the grounds of it being new? And I thought about that a lot, which is like, because you have to know that probably by your 3rd or 4th milsim, you've probably experienced everything that you will regularly experience, barring some extreme kind of deviation from it. But overall, and I thought to that, it's like, do you think you'd still have fun? And I go, yeah, because in my opinion, a hobby shouldn't sustain you on new experiences, because a hobby just can't experience that for very long if you're doing it in any kind of serious capacity. So you have to be able to experience your hobby in a way where you still feel it's extremely fun, even if this is by no means your first time. I think Chas, when I met him at Iron Force, this was by no means his first milsim op, not at all. But that guy did not. He still acted like it was his first time playing, and he still had the greatest time. And it's why for me, like, I would give nothing more than to play with him again, because he was such a infectious person and how much fun he was having, but it didn't dull him that it wasn't new to him in any way.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because you talk about all these different roles that you could do at a milsim. And that really sort of reinforces this other point around what people find fun at an airsoft game. Well, that depends on the person, right? It depends on the player. It depends on their level of experience. Of course, like you've got a brand new player, you're not going to have them as a squad leader, right? Unless they just rolled out of the infantry and that's what they're going to do or whatever. But like the average person, like it's a skill set that takes time to build. And maybe you don't want to be in charge of people and maybe you don't find that fun. And so as a result of that, we end up in this place again, which is that we need to be really sort of fluid into the kinds of things that we do and accepting of what it is that people want to do in a way that, in other hobbies, like you don't have that flexibility, right? Like this is the way that you play hockey. This is the way that you enjoy movies. This is the way that you do whatever, right? This is the way you play card games or what have you. There is no fluidity in that. Like, yes, you can play different styles or whatever, but in airsoft, you really have this more openness that doesn't exist, and we as players, like we really need to be open to that, right?
Yeah, we have to be, and especially for players to have these. And I'll always remember something my girlfriend actually asked me, like it was even before I went to Iron Horse, where she asked me, "Hun, is it okay if all I ever want to do is just play pickup games?" And I kind of laughed at myself a little because I thought, yeah, of course that's okay. Why would you not? Why would that be unacceptable for you to do so?
Yeah, really.
But this is what reminded me when it came to mainstream hobbies, is because in mainstream hobbies, there's often this expectation that the more you're into it, basically, not only the more you engage with it, but also the way you engage with it changes as well, though. So for instance, when it comes to movies, especially, it's often used as a way of insulting people they deem to be like, dumber or whatever, is like, oh my God, you should watch more movies. Because the expectation is if you watch more movies, like, what you like, what you don't like, etc., changes. But when I went through that that wasn't my experience at all. And I would watch all the movies they told me to, but the movies I liked watching most didn't change. My feelings on it were still the same. And so, like, because of that, it sort of created this more alienated form. Whereas in airsoft, it's kind of that thing where when she asked me that, when it's like, yeah, of course you can, like, do you think it would be fun for you to do a milsim or play speed soft? Sure, I would say by all means do that if you feel that's what your calling is. I played speed soft. It wasn't my thing. And for me, I didn't personally like it for various reasons. But I'm like, the people who have fun with it, if that's how you want to take this part of your hobby and if it keeps you in, you know what, do it. I just don't have a problem with it and all those things. But if you want to spend your entire time, your airsoft career, using that very loosely here, like your entire time playing airsoft, and you just want to only play pickup games at like your one field or whatever fields that are ever open to you, and you want to do that your whole time, do it. Like, that's what this hobby is for. You're here to, it's as you said, it's a hobby. It's not a lifestyle. And unfortunately, in mainstream hobbies, I found it often became a lifestyle for a lot of people.
Definitely. Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And, it harkens back to one of the very, very first episodes that we did of this podcast ever, which was this idea of like, what's the best way to enjoy airsoft? And the answer is just yes, right? What's the best way to enjoy airsoft? Yes. Like, just do it. And whatever that looks like, I think, again, like to your point just now, when someone says to you, like, is it okay for me to do whatever? The answer is yes. Like, unless it's like being an asshole to someone, like, which then no, definitely not. But like, if you want to enjoy airsoft by, LARPing, if you want to enjoy airsoft by wearing World War II kit, if you want to enjoy airsoft by playing speed, none of that really matters. Like, just because you personally don't necessarily enjoy how other people enjoy airsoft, the biggest thing is you don't get to tell other people, right? And you shouldn't. And I think we've had a really good job of that in our Discord community. Like, nobody is telling anybody else how they have to enjoy our sport, right? It's really up to everybody else. Now, if you want an opinion as to what we think is effective or not effective, certainly can give ideas. But whether you choose to do that or not is ultimately up to you, right? Like, I can tell you until I'm blue in the face what I think is the best way to take a piece of cover, to transition shoulders, to do whatever. If you agree with me, then great, and do those things, then excellent. And if you don't, then that's okay too. Like, I'm not your boss, right? It's not up to me to determine how you're supposed to have fun, right? Which I think is definitely more of a factor in other communities, right? In other hobbies.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Like, it's even like a question of the day I even answered recently, which was that what would be a replica you would like to own? I didn't ask with the intention whether it was real or not, but just like if it were to exist, like even if you didn't think it was effective. So for me, I said, like, I really want to, like, after I get this new place and once I can start buying airsoft stuff again, like, I want to get myself a Tokyo Marui Mark 23 because it's the only one I've seen that has that unique laser/flashlight box thing. I never even knew what it was called. That is attached to the underside of it because it's exactly the handgun Solid Snake used in the original. They're kind of dubious on effectiveness anyway. So it's kind of I just want to use it because I'm like, it would just be fun for me. I don't care how effective I wouldn't be, even though it means I'd have to probably use a holster that was very inconvenient or whatever is the case. I'd be like, I don't care. It's just fun. I want to use it.
Yeah, absolutely.
For me, I would say that a main thing I would always want to emphasize, though, that I feel that it's very great to have other hobbies that can juxtapose their experiences with others because it can even influence how you view them as well. That's why since then, I take my hobbies in a very casual manner because I just personally view it that it's just not healthy to try to view your hobby in a very lifestyle way because your life sort of gets consumed by it. And especially when it comes to having to determine how other people experience it, it's just that whole message again of where if you try to have your whole life be dictating also other people, if they end up leaving, why would that make you feel good? If you see people who are otherwise good and you're going to have them leave just because they don't engage in the hobby the same way you do, it's no fun for anyone. But for airsoft, it's a very real experience for us. If we do that to enough people, our field's closed. There's no other way around it.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Yeah. And I think to sort of close out some of these thoughts, I think, one of our key messages has always be to be kind, right? Be kind to other people because, you don't know what they're going through. You don't know what they're interested in. You don't know what their history is. And you also don't know, other factors like what their budget is. It's fine for people to go out there and be like, oh, buy one, cry once. Yeah. Well, you know what? Like a cry BDU is like $400 or whatever, and pretty hard to get in Canada as a side note. So like, I don't know what your budget is. Why would I tell you go spend that money if I don't know what that looks like? And we've seen that on Discord a few times where I've said, said to people, it's like, oh, hey, you should look at that. And people are like, oh, well, I don't, it's not really in budget for me. And I'm like, oh, crap, I didn't really mean it that way. But I mean, no harm, no foul. But all of that contributes ultimately to whether or not people feel like, am I good enough to play this sport? And, that is not the vibe that we're trying to put out there, which is really, to your point, people should do what they think is fun. And they should definitely try different parts of our sport, because there's a lot of different ways to experience it. I think, when we first started talking, like all that time ago, it was you experiencing a brand new part of airsoft that you'd never experienced before. Right. And I'm obviously very glad you did, because it's completely changed your outlook on how you look at this sport and how, and as a hobby, I would say as well, and also how awesome it can be for people when they approach it in the right way, like Chaz, to not lose that, first game joy of like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is the coolest thing I've ever done, even though it's the 5th time, 10th time, 20th time that you've done that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that for me is why I always want to mimic how Chas does it. Because for me, like I've already had that where like when I experienced that hobby burnout when I was in movies, and I just swore I didn't want to feel that for a hobby ever again. Because it's like for me, it's honestly for me the worst feeling, because you hold contempt for this thing that you loved doing. And I just want to make sure I don't have that again. So for me, I go with airsoft. If I have to take breaks from it, sure, I'm more than happy to. All if whatever it needs, so that way I can make sure that when I do stuff, I'll still have just as much fun as the first time I did it.
Awesome. Well, listen, Alex, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so grateful to have you on. It was great to catch up with you. And guys, if as we always say, if you want to have conversations with Alex and myself, the Discord link is in the description. We'd love to have you join. Until then, though, that's all we've got for you this week. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you next week.